Hello, it's Book Quote Wednesday and the word is old. Today I am reading from young adult fantasy The Teen, the Witch and the Thief. The teen obviously is young, the witch and the thief are immeasurably ancient. To keep with the old theme, even though the story is set in the present day, it begins with an assault back in the Dark Ages, otherwise known as Kent, in the 1970s. It was the movement that attracted Malcolm's attention, a human figure in the corner of his eye where no figure should be. He looked up and, with a stab of hostility, saw the man shimmering the other side of a sea of golden corn. "Huh," he thought, and turned his attention to the Primus stove that squatted in front of the tent. A bit of fumbling with the valve, only a couple of broken matches, and he had a little circle of flame. It was almost invisible, and he had to hold a hand over it briefly to feel the warmth and confirm something was happening. "Water," he called. "Front of the car," came a voice from the tent. The camp was a simple arrangement that pleased Malcolm at every level. It was practical. Hedge, tent and car meant there would always be shade for them to sit in as sun and shadows moved during the day. And it was also respectful. The neat straight lines of the green tent and the red Hillman imp showed that this was clearly an artificial enclave in the corner of a 1,000-year-old Cambridgeshire field. But at the same time it made the point they were only passing through. It also showed quite clearly that this corner of the field was taken, Malcolm thought as he shot a dark look at the figure. It hadn't moved, and the wavering air made it seem to be wearing long flowing robes. Well, fine, just stay there. He pulled a jerry can full of water out of the car's front compartment and pushed the lid shut. Diana had persuaded her parents to lend it to her by saying she and a friend wanted to go camping. She hadn't specified the friend's gender, and Malcolm thought, why should she? He liked to think he was perfectly capable of sharing a tent with a gorgeous woman and not giving her father, the vicar, any cause for concern, if that was what the gorgeous woman wanted. He wasn't quite sure at this point what she did want. Maybe he would find out over the course of the weekend. Malcolm was pretty sure what he wanted himself. Before he had met Diana, he would have said that being a 20-year-old second-year law student was far too young for the kind of decision he had in mind, but now he had very little doubt. What he wanted involved finally meeting her parents and taking her back to Salisbury to meet his, and her father, the vicar, dressing up in his work clothes and standing in front of them and making himself useful. After they had graduated and he had started his barrister training, if she was willing to wait that long. Last year's so-called summer of love hadn't really impinged on Diana's family, but then it hadn't really affected Malcolm either. He was very happy to leave it that way. His jeans maybe had a slight curve at the end of the legs, his hair just covered his ears. "This is your hippie phase, boy," he thought wryly. "Might as well make the most of it." He poured water into a saucepan and set it on top of the stove. Then he glanced up again at the intruder and recoiled slightly because the other man was already halfway across the field towards them. Malcolm's jaw tightened as he stood to meet the newcomer. He marshalled phrases in his mind that translated very nicely to "shove off, this corner's taken." And good grief, he really was wearing robes. They swelled out behind him as if caught in the wind, making him seem to be racing through the corn. They were ludicrously grand and ornate, richly embroidered with intricate geometric golden patterns that seemed to have a life of their own. More than anything else, they reminded Malcolm of one of the royals in a pack of cards. Then the man was through the last of the heat shimmer and close enough for Malcolm to see him properly. He was old and skinny, his face was wrinkled, and his head bobbed at the end of a neck as scrawny as a turkey's. And as for the hair, his hair was long and snow-white, and it was shaved into the shape of a V. The point of the V was like a pronounced widow's peak, and the two long ends trailed back over his shoulders. Malcolm had it now. The old guy had to be a refugee from some pop festival, one of those bands his brother always raved about, Pink King or Crimson Lloyd or whatever they were called. Well, decayed hippy or not, Malcolm wasn't going to let him intrude on their camp. He drew a breath and opened his mouth to speak. But then he saw that the man wasn't just walking through the corn, or rather, he quite literally was. The corn didn't rustle, and he wasn't pushing it aside, he was walking through it. He wasn't even solid. In fact, Malcolm wasn't sure that his legs were even moving beneath the robes. He was gliding forwards, bearing down on the camp, his eyes fixed firmly and gleefully on Malcolm. Malcolm had sometimes wondered how he would react if he saw a ghost. Now he knew. Apparently, he just watched. He couldn't take his eyes off the apparition. He moved his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. How did he greet something like this? But the apparition was still coming, and Malcolm realized suddenly it wasn't going to stop. He drew a breath to call Diana, and then suddenly it was on him. Malcolm shouted and fell over backwards. He felt a foot strike the primus stove, and then the old man's face was all the world. What had just been an image in his eyes had turned solid inside his brain. The old man's expression had become a presence inside him, a malevolent force that started to take him apart. Malcolm screamed as it reached through him, through the skin and blood vessels, through the layers of muscle and fat, deep, deep down into the heart of Malcolm Jackson. Malcolm fell out of that Cambridgeshire field into a void of nothing. Malcolm does reappear in the book in a very significant role as an older, retired man. Remember, you can buy my books at www.benjeeps.com. See you next time.